Alright, this is week 5, Photoshop CC. We're going to go ahead and do a little bit in Camera Raw and then go into Photoshop. So we're going to go ahead and open this photo right here called Seattle for obvious reasons. Size my raw dialog so it fits in your window here. Alright, so a couple things we want to look at here is a sequence of how we edit a raw photo. First thing that we could do is we could come right here to Auto, click that, and it doesn't do too bad, but we're going to just go away from that. I'd say the first thing that we want to do really is, these are sort of in order of how we would adjust them. So let's first adjust the white balance. A couple of ways we could do that is we could know the white balance color, it was about daylight. It's not too bad. It might have been a little cloudy. As you can see from the clouds, that actually looks pretty darn close. And if you look at that, you can see that our temperature is 6500 with a plus 10 on the tint. We could also come over here and click this white balance tool. If we have something that is white or a middle gray in our image, we could click on that as a reference. So let's click on that and then click on this part of the cloud. It's a little cooler than we think, right? Let's try right clicking in here. Let's try it in here. That's a little better. I still think I'm just going to eyeball here and roll it up to about $6,000. I think that looks pretty good. Let's zoom in a little bit. As you remember, we can press Control plus. Then we can use the hand tool here to move around our image. You can see some people up there. That's pretty good for such a wide lens. I guess 7200 is not a wide lens, is it? Alright, so let's look at the clouds here for a minute. So first I'd say, let's look at this histogram here. We can turn on the shadow clipping warning. Turn that on. See, we don't really see any shadow clipping warnings, otherwise it'd be lit up blue. And this is the highlight clipping warning. So pretty much what you'd want to do is you'd want the histogram to come to the edge before have it come down right at the edge. So you see all that dead space right there. I'm talking from the end of the graph to all the way to right there. That is too much dead space. We're going to get rid of that by pushing the exposure up. That's a little better, and we're going to bring these highlights down a little bit to keep let's push that up a little more. Highlights down. And also push the shadows up just a titch. Bring those blacks down just a little bit. So we're looking to try to keep and maintain texture in the clouds here. We're going to note that that's 0.65, but watch what happens when I go way up. Right there, detail's gone. I'll zoom out so you can see. And obviously detail would be gone at that stage. The detail would have been gone a lot more if I'd pushed it up here and it started blowing out at around 2. And see, I can bring some of that back. Just go back right about where we were, okay? I think that's really not too bad right there. So let's keep rolling down. The whites, you can adjust them if you want. I would say let's move them down just a little bit. So when you look at this, you see these 4 zones right here. We have our highlights, our lights, our shadows, and our blacks. That's what these are right here. It's a little more representative when you look at the curves dialog box. You see these splits right here. You can see the highlights, the lights, the shadows, and the darks. So you can see as I push those down, you see I'm pushing those down. You can see I'm going to push the lights up. The different parts. This is actually this is the zone system. I think we can push the shadows down a little bit. Let's zoom out a little bit, see how that looks. Still looks pretty good. Alright, so also if you were over in here, you could have came over to your point one and chosen some of these presets. So you can see those different settings. We're going to keep it at linear and leave it where it is. So let's go back over here. So clarity. Clarity is a sketchy one here because it's easy to make things look horrible fast. We're going to zoom in a little bit, maybe right back here on these colored buildings here. Watch what happens when I push this up. So that's getting real dark. But also look at some of the noise that's pulling in there as we get way up there. zoom out and see what that looks like. So from there to there. You see what happened to our shadows a little bit, that blue that came in, that's because this is on. But from there to there. Which is better? It's a little bit of a judgment call sometimes. Go on this side, you see what's happening with it, again all blurry like you haven't cleaned your lens in a while. So with clarity, I would say that you want to be real conservative on it. So let's push it up just a little bit, maybe 5. If I was doing maybe an elderly lady with wrinkles or someone I was trying to defeature a little bit, I might go -10, somewhere around 8 or 10. And it'll add sort of a softness without making it look too artificial or too heavily edited. So we're going to push it up to, let's just go 5. Okay, so there's two more controls in there. There's vibrance and saturation. Vibrance increases the overall color, but it tries to respect skin tones, Caucasian skin tones especially. So watch what happens. You know, color went up a lot. You see in the blue in the buildings and the blue in the sky. If this was a picture of a person and I pushed vibrance up, it would leave their skin tone alone for the most part, and it would increase all the other colors. So imagine you were taking a picture out on a nice spring day with a lot of greens, or it's fall colors, and you wanted the fall colors to pop, but you don't want to adjust their skin tones. Then you could push the vibrance up and see how that works. Saturation is just straight up color. It affects everything. In fact, you can see some of the tones that it was ignoring before, these yellows here. Watch when I go back here and I'll push vibrance back up. And you see it pretty much left those yellows alone, huh? For the most part, because that's similar to a skin tone color. So we're not really going to adjust either one of these. And you could just type in 0 on your keyboard if you wanted to get them back to 0. Okay, tone curve we've already briefly talked about. Let's look over here on the sharpening tab. I would not do sharpening here. What I may do sometimes is I may do a little bit of noise reduction. You know, our ISO is fairly low and it's a fairly clean image. Let's zoom in here a little bit. You know, you can see a lot of distortion here in the waves from the sun. I resolved a lot of detail. I didn't notice those people on there before. Alright, so we could push it up just a little bit. Let's see if we really have a problem with noise. I really don't think so, but we could push luminance noise reduction up a little bit. So luminance noise is just straight up snow, so static, that you would see in an image. So luminance noise is not something that, you know, is overly objectionable, I would say. It can be if it's strong, but for the most part it almost has a little bit of a film grain. So color noise is different, and this image doesn't have any color noise. But color noise would be where you'd see in the shadows, you would see some, maybe there's some here in this shadows right here. Not really. See, there's a lot of shadows over here. There's no color noise, but it would be the same type of snow, but it'd be red, blue, green, those little purple or colored dots. Alright, so let's go back to the next tab here. So this is the hue, saturation, luminance tab. You can see, as we talked about in class, here's the hue, here's the saturation. So we can come into each individual channel and we can say, you know what, I think the blues need to be a little stronger. So you watch there, I can push the blues up. I'm only affecting the blues. You can see all the other colors are staying the same. I could bring the yellows up. You know, and yellow is partly in those greens there in those trees too. I could come in here and say, you know what, the blues are not blue enough, they're too purple. Like that. So I can come over here and make them a little more bluish green color. I can change the color of the purples. Pretty much you can come into each of these areas. Set default on each of these. And then luminance is the color of those channels. So maybe I want the blues to be darker. This is the brightness. You see up here especially. See how the blue is getting darker? It actually sort of, I do like what's going on with that. So we might crunch that down just a little bit. So that's what happens on the hue saturation tab. We could also come in here and hit convert to grayscale. And then you can come in here and adjust each of your colors, and you can affect the different types of black and white. So it's actually pretty nice. You can see you can make the green trees pretty dark. You can turn the aquas up. We can turn the blues down, which one are our weakest ones, make sort of a black sky. We can push auto and see what happens. Let's go back to that. So we can turn this back off. Go back to luminance, keep blues down a little bit. Alright, so if you do go do that, it's a great way to convert to black and white, but I wouldn't normally recommend it. I'd also do that inside Photoshop. So split toning we talked about briefly. And so if you look at this, this is highlights, and then this says shadows. And the two controls you have are tint and saturation. So the highlights are the whites, or these areas at the top part of the histogram, and the shadows are obviously the other side. So let's turn the saturation up on our shadows. Get sort of a retro 70s look, then I can change the color of that, right? And then I can say, okay, what if I want to do the same with my highlights? I can turn those up. You see my highlight clipping warning coming in. I'm just going to turn that off for a minute. And then I can adjust the tint of that too. And now here's balance, which shifts the difference between these two and mixes them. Right, so let's just turn all these off because ain't nobody got time for that. So alright, let's go to the next one, lens correction. So this actually works pretty good typically. Remove chromatic aberration, enable profile correction. You see this one, what's happening inside of this when I click it. You see how the middle is a little bit sunken in. When I click that, it recognized what lens I was using. And then I can just also manually adjust the distortion amount. So we're just going to leave it there, but you could turn that on, and then you could also set some different ones and make new lens profiles. So here's manual, and then you can say I can adjust the pin cushion. A little crazy. I might actually do that sometimes if things are a little wonky. But you know, we don't need that much pin cushion there. So we're just going to leave it where it was. And then fringing is where when you have highlights, especially like on tree branches or areas where sun's coming through and there's a lot of contrast between a very, very bright source and then something that's not very bright. And so then you'll get fringing. So this will appear as just discoloration or glowing of a different color. Alright, so let's go to FX for a minute. So dehaze. I like dehaze and I use it quite a bit on most images. So let's kick it up for a minute. We're going to go all the way just so you can see the difference. Way too much, right? But what it's doing is it's putting a lot of crunch in here and it's changing the contrast a lot. Look at the detail it's bringing out in the clouds. Let's go back to nothing. But so maybe somewhere in the middle is not so bad, you know, somewhere in there. But what's happening now when I push the dehaze up, I'm losing a lot of detail in here. Let's zoom in more on these people here that we could see before, okay? I guess I can still see them. Maybe we'll go up around 20. Alright. The other one that's in the effects menu here is post-crop vignetting. So let's look at this for a minute. So a vignette is a darkening or brightening of the edges of the image. So you see, I'll just drag it down. And so you go into the extreme, you can see what's happening here. You can look at some of these other settings. This is the size of the midpoint. I make it really small. And certainly that's a little ridiculous, but maybe if I was just doing a slight vignette, you know, and I just wanted to keep the center highlighted, that might not be so bad. Let's keep it at the extreme for a minute. Okay, you look at the roundness. So that's pretty square. And then this is how it feathers, you know, from a very abrupt to a soft, even softer. And then this is our highlights in that. So we could also come in here and we could change these to color priority. And then we could also change it to paint overlay. And then we could adjust them from there. So let's just leave it on highlight priority. And we'll just lower just a little bit. You know, you could also actually push it up even the other way where you can make them even a little wider. So if the corners were darker, you could actually bring the lightness back into them. Watch this corner down here as I push that up. You know, that's obviously way too much, but we could bring it up just a little bit if maybe, depending on the shot. and how well your lens works. Grain here, this is just to add grain. I can think of only a couple times I've ever really added grain, but you'll see we could add a lot of grain here. And then you get to change the size of the grain, really large to really small, and then how rough or smooth the grain is. So if you wanted to go in here and maybe you do a black and white image, or you wanted to try to add some grain for some reason, more power to you. You can do that right there. This is camera calibration. So if you think about this for a minute, think of how your presets in your camera work. You know, you have a camera faithful, landscape, neutral. So you can come in here and go to some presets, and it'll affect the overall color of your image and contrast. So you can use this as a starting point. I would say just leave it alone. There's different versions you can do because they were a little different, but I've really never found a practical purpose for this, except if you find that, you know, your camera, maybe it's always a little bit, you know, it's always got a little too much red in it. You could start backing down the red, and you could save this as a profile. Then you could apply it from then on. You would save it by going up here and saying save settings, and you would set them up there. Alright, so then these are presets. If I've went through and done all these settings here, I could come over to my presets and I could say, I could make them as defaults. I can save settings, and I get to choose what I want to save. I can apply tone adjustments. We're not going to do anything auto. So now I can say okay. I can turn off, say, you know, I don't want it to affect sharpening. We'll leave that alone. Okay, we save it. We give it a name. Seattle preset. Alright. Alright, so we could do that, and then next time we come there, if you look at our preset menu here, you see it's right there. So if we had a different image later on, we click that and it'd apply these same settings. So that's pretty handy. And then snapshots are for taking snapshots as you go. So you come here and take a picture and call it a before I made it black and white. And this is sort of like just giving you areas that you can go back. Let's go over to the hue saturation grayscale for a minute. Okay, let's make another one. Oops, sorry, down here. After I made it black and white. So we can go back here. Bam, we're right back in that snapshot. It's a little similar to going up and down in either making a snapshot and saving a new image, or duplicating it inside Lightroom, or just being able to go back to certain layers. So you can make snapshots to take you back to any place where you think it's pretty good, but you want to go in and try and screw around a little bit. At least you got something you can go back to. Alright, so we've used these tools a little bit as we've been going. We've got the zoom tool. We've got the hand tool. This doesn't do anything right here because we're not zoomed in enough to need it. So now that I zoom in a little bit, now I can use it to move this around. And you remember plus or minus shortcuts on your keyboard, so I'm going to go plus to zoom in and control minus to zoom out, right? Okay. So here's the eyedropper tool that we used when we were on this basic tab here, and we wanted to choose a white balance point. This is a color sampler tool. We're not really going to use that. This is the targeted adjustment tool. So what this tool is, it's sort of like curves. So if we can say, so see this brightness here? So we've clicked the tool, and I'm going to hover above this white here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and drag down on it, and watch what happens. See, I've selected just that area of my image, and I've dragged it downwards. So I've lowered it, and now I can raise it back up. And I can come over here and click down in the shadow area here. I'm going to click and drag it upwards a little bit. You can see what's going on with that. So it's a good way to just go in and say, it's like, man, maybe I want that red to be a little more. You can push it up a little bit. Alright, this is the crop tool. You can see that from this that we can set different, as I do this, I'm going to right click here, and you see I have different aspect ratios. So a 2:3 is what your camera normally shoots. So in theory, this would be the same size, right? You know, a 4:5 would be like an 8:10, right? So you can see that'd be a square one, but you can come in here and you can crop it out to that. But we're not going to hit any of that, so I'm going to hit escape. Okay, this is the level tool. If I knew of a level surface in here, I could drag it along and I could say, hey, that's level, so adjust the rest of the image accordingly. So we could drag it along the top of this building right here. And I'll go extreme just to show you what it does. Hit escape. I'm going to do it again here. Let's grab the level tool. Anyway, just going to adjust it just a little bit. It also works up and down. If I come here and I say that's straight, it's going to adjust it accordingly, right? I'll just leave it like that. This is the transform tool. So with this tool, we can set up different set points, and then we can come in here and adjust these. Make it taller, shorter, horizontal, rotate it. Really, it's a crazy place to be in. I wouldn't do any of this, and I do that inside Photoshop. Okay, this is the spot removal tool. If we did see a spot in here, let's zoom in and see if we can find one. You think I gotta have a sensor spot here somewhere, right? It's even more impressive if I don't have a sensor spot here, unless I'm missing it. Let's say that little white thing right there is a sensor spot, that little piece of cloud. Actually, this one right here. We're going to get rid of that. So you can see from this tool, so you see the center, that's where the main part of it is, and then the rest is a feather. So watch as I drag this feather down. You can see that those sizes changed relative to each other, right? And then there's opacity. So and it's also on Hill, not on Clone. So what Hill does, the difference between Healing Brush and Clone tool, is that the Clone tool will only, it'll just clone it, so it'll leave any rough edges that are there. The Healing Brush tool actually does a clone, plus it fixes the edges with what's around it. So I'm going to click on that, and then I'm going to drag it up to right there is where my source is going to be. I zoom out a little bit. That did not work like I wanted. Let me hit Control Z to back up. Let's do that one right there. So I'm going to click that, and then I'm going to pull it from right over there. So if you see what happened, we'll do it to the top of the tower there real quick. So that's what I want to change, and this is where I want to get it from. Maybe I want to get it from down here. Or over here, you see it's starting to build that in up there, right? But it's going to also blur it. Alright, so let's hit Control Z a couple times. Alright, so I clicked on that and I deleted that, and I'm going to click on this one and delete that too. Visualize spots is actually sort of cool. It'll help you get in here so you can see where your sensor spots may be. And this is actually something that's not inside Lightroom. So when you see this right here, you'll see that I'm using my plus or my brackets here to change my brush size, just like you learned inside Photoshop. Click that, and let's pull it from right there. Now we can turn that off. All good to go. Clean way to get rid of dust spots. Next one is red eye removal tool. I would not use that. Essentially what it is you detect the eyes and you draw a little box around it. And you can see it has little things. So I'd pull this over somebody's eyeballs, and then I would adjust the size of the pupils, and then I could darken them. So this is an adjustment brush. So an adjustment brush, if you look at this, look at all the settings that you have with this. You can adjust exposure, color temperature, and you also have down here at the bottom you have the size and the feather and different things such as that. So what this is doing right now is it's affecting the darkness, right? Because that's what this is set to, as exposure. You can see that I can also adjust it after the fact. Or just click on that and hit delete. So pretty handy tool if I wanted to just bring some highlights back in the clouds. I could do that a little bit, you know. I'm just painting on there. Okay, this next one is a graduated filter. This works pretty slick. So this is the same as in Lightroom. We're going to take it and click it from the top and drag it down. So the green is where it stops and the red is where it ends. Okay. So there's not much going on here except for highlights. I'm just going to turn that back down, but you can see what's happening here if I was to turn this down. Okay. So you can see I can darken that a little bit, and I can even come down here and I can darken that. I can make the sky a little bluer. I can do lots of things, but we're just going to leave it alone. Just more want to let you see how that works. But it works out pretty good for like lightening or darkening. You know, you can darken the skies just a little bit, give them a little more blue. Okay, this is the radial filter. So it's like both of these essentially, but now it's a radial filter. So I can drag it here. And now you can see as I just... The one thing that you'll notice right here is I'm lowering the exposure and everything else is changing. Because look down here at the very bottom, you see how it says outside is the default for some reason. Maybe I'm wanting to do it on the inside of the mask. Or the inside of that. So that makes sense. And then you can drag this around. You can say, really, I wanted it to be this way. You're trying to fit it to somebody's face. Trying to bring it out a little bit. Maybe you don't want to make it as strong. And then maybe you want to feather it even more, you know. Bring it in like that. We're going to actually just delete it. But it's a handy tool. We're not going to really get into the preferences right now, but this will let us rotate the image. All pretty self-explanatory there. Now another part of the options I want to give you information on is, so here's Adobe RGB. This is a color space and then the size. You see it's set to 5 megapixel. That's not a 5 megapixel image, but that's what size it's going to make it. So I could say don't resize it. So it's going to leave it as 16.7, and that's because I cropped it down, right? But I could easily resize it as I go, and I could come in here and say, hey, give it to me in megapixels, you know what I mean? I want it to be 10 megapixels. So you could resize it as you go. You could also go in there and say, let's go to sRGB, and then you can set these for new workflows and set those up. You know, we can set it up here and give it a name, such as Doug's Presets or something like that. So if you were doing things in, normally you would leave this alone. But if I'm upsizing right now, I would upsize using this method. So if I had an image that started out, say maybe 20 megapixels, and I cropped half of it off so it was only 10 megapixels, I might come in here as I go from RAW to Photoshop and say, you know what, give me 15 megapixels. And then this is going to be a lot better upscaling because I'm taking it from something smaller while it's still raw and enlarging it while I still have all that data from the raw file. So again, we're just going to leave it alone. And we got into that by clicking this hyperlink looking thing right here. Okay, so you see now it's going to open as sRGB, the sizes, and then we can just hit open image, or we could hit done. Done will just close this image. That's it. It's going to write a new file there. And in fact, let's go ahead and hit done for a minute. And we'll go back to that folder. You'll see that now there's this new file there, which is the XMP file. It was just barely created. It saved all those settings. So when I come in here and I open this image, you know, you'll see all these settings and they're all saved right where they were. Let me open that for a minute. It's because I want to just have it where it is. But let's go back over here and let's delete that. Now let's open this again. You see all the settings are gone, even the crop. So now when I hit open image, you'll see that I have two different ones. One was those presets that we had already applied, and then one was so sort of like a before and after, but really that's not the point as much as that it creates that XMP file. Alright, so let's close that. Okay, so that takes you all the way into Adobe Photoshop using Adobe Camera Raw. Amazes me how much detail I get. So it's a long ways away. Alright, so, and well, you can see now this is like horrible, right? That building's crooked and stuff. I'll give you guys one freebie with the raw dialogue or with the raw opening and converting trick. Is up here in edit, free transform, you'll see we can't free transform right now. Why can't we? It's because we could hit Control A. Now you'll see we have these marching ants around it. Now we can come up here and we can go up to free transform. Now free transform lets you do whatever you want, right? You can squeeze it, you can resize it, you can do whatever you want essentially. However, if you hold down Control, when you grab these corners, you can skew it horribly. The other thing to know about free transform is if you hold down Shift, watch what happens when I hold down Shift. I cannot change the perspective of this. So even if I grab the side and pull it in, jeez. Well, that didn't work right, did it? I think they might have changed that. So when you're grabbing this, if you hold down Shift, it'll maintain its perspective. If you hold down Control, now I can pull the edge out here. So you see how this is further here? I would say that the lower parts, like the image is coming down like this, right? So this edge needs to come out to the right. So I'm going to hold down Control, click, and drag it out. And click on the bottom, drag it down a little bit. And I think that looks fairly straight. I can even drag it out just a little more. And if this side gets a little out of control, like maybe it is over here, let's drag that side out a little bit too. There's a thing called keystoning, an effect that's happening when you're photographing something that's, your lens does some funny things to buildings and structures that are directly straight up and down. And a lot of times they'll get skewed and they'll need to have their perspective corrected. If you're dead set on, straight in the middle, shooting all sides of it, you would still get a little bit of it, but really it's mostly happens from you looking upwards towards something. Let's go ahead. Hit that. We're going to press Control D to shut down the selection, and then we're just going to go ahead and save it. And we're in the same file here. We're just going to leave it Seattle. I always like to put an M before or after a file, typically usually at the beginning. I just do a lowercase m for modified. So if I was going to do a modified file like I've worked on it, then I'd just call it M. If it was a web-sized image, you'll see if you're ever looking through my hard drive, you'd say, what are all these W's about? It's because I've resized it for the web, and I want to make sure that it's not going to get saved. That it's not going to get confused for another image when I go to print it. Alright, is that okay? Alright, thanks, and then we'll get you back into another video. Thanks. Bye.